Yeah, g'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again with another video. Today we're going to talk about 4 different type of chains out there. I'm seeing a bit of a trend in the marketplace where if we go back many years ago, we had the typical C shape that was in your typical full chisel chain. And that C shape was defined pretty much like that. What I'm seeing these days is this little small section on the working corner that's got a straight section rather than a curve on it. And hopefully you can really see that straight section there. I filed that straight because that's typically what you'll see, but what I've actually done is some close-up pictures of all of these, and we'll go through those. But the one that probably stands out the most, that is really different than everything else, would have to be Husqvarna's X-Cut. And the reason that it stands out more so than anything else, because it is really aggressive, and we'll have a good look at that. And if you look at that, it's got, let's get a bit of dirt off there. It's got a fairly aggressive point there. So that point there is 40 degrees, top plate cutting angle. So that's 40 degrees there, and it's straight, right? It's dead straight. It's a line. Then the side plate comes down at about 85 degrees, and then we've got a bit of a curve here. This is something that cannot be duplicated by a file. So the moment you put a file in there, you'll destroy that shape. And that's what I'm seeing with a lot of chains. That's the Stihl RS. It's only got a little tiny point on it, so we're going to have a look at them in detail. And then if we look at the Hurricane chain, and we can sort of do a brief close-up of that as well, and you'll see that that's got that little sharp point at the front. And then have a look at the back slope of the side plate there, and it goes right down to the bottom of the gullet. And then obviously we have Stihl Hexa, and Stihl Hexa top plate cutting angle comes in at 60 degrees and then goes down on that angle at 60 degrees. So we've got a spacing of 120 degrees. So we're going to have a look at those in some detail and put some measurements on them, and then have a bit of a discussion after about how they perform, because I've got these chains, I've been using them for quite a while, and I can let you know how good they work. So we'll get into that after we have a look at the different profiles and the angles that are on them. Okay, so we've got Husqvarna's X-Cut C85, and as you can see, it's got a very little sharp point, as what we were mentioning before. A lot of the full chisels are coming out with this little point. So we measured that point, we'll put a slide up, and it came in at 40 degrees. So that is a really aggressive angle, considering that the top plate cutting angle is normally 60 degrees. So 40 degrees is very, very aggressive. And it comes down about halfway down the side plate. The next slide, we'll pop that up there, shows the side plate that actually has a back slope on it, which is totally the opposite of what a lot of other chains have. Because if you look at the Stihl gauge that we've got here, you can clearly see there's 60 degrees. It's forward sloping. These are all forward sloping. Whereas the actual tooth has a back slope there. So we'll put a slide up and show the 10-degree back slope. So yeah, totally different. Yeah, a back slope on it. And we have another slide. We'll pop another one up there that actually shows when we measured it being the 10-degree back slope. The other thing to also remember is that we're measuring from 90 degrees vertical reference point. So to the left will be, let's call it negative degrees. We'll go 10, 20, 30, 40. And from the right side of the 90 degree vertical reference point, will decline going 80, 70, 60 and so on. So anytime that you're quoting angles, in most cases, we're talking about 90 degrees being the vertical reference point. Now the top plate has a slope, a backward slope of 10 degrees, so we can put a slide up of that one there. This is typical. Most of them range anywhere, I've seen even 8 degrees up to 12 degrees, but typically 10's pretty common. So yeah, you'll see that. The next angle is your 30 degree top plate angle, so we'll put a slide up of that. That's fairly common and generic. If you have timber that's extremely soft, you could get away with Pinus radiata, and people would run 35 degrees in a temperature that's well above frozen. If you have extremely hard wood and you do live in a climate where you're cutting frozen wood, then it's recommended that you use 25 degree top plate angle. But 30 degrees in most cases will get you out of trouble. So the next chain that we're going to have a look at is Stihl's RS full chisel chain. And we've got a little tiny point on that as well, so that's interesting. The first slide that we'll put up will be the top plate cutting angle, and that has 60 degree top plate cutting angle, but on a Stihl USG grinder that will be 30 degrees, because it depends whether you're using 0 degrees as a reference point or 90 degrees as a reference point. Either way, it's a 30 degree angle, which is a 60 degree angle using a 90 degree reference point. Now, the next slide that we've got is the side plate angle. And again, reference of the software that I got is showing 5 degrees, but in actual fact, depends which way you look at your reference point, that's 85 degrees. So if we're to look at the Stihl little gauge, it would be 85 degrees. Okay, so the next one, your top plate angle, we'll have a look at that. That comes in at 30 degrees. So that, again, that's fairly standard. As we spoke before, it's only the extremely very soft wood that you'd ever use 35 degrees. And if you're cutting frozen wood, you'd use 25 degrees top plate angle. The next slide will be the back slope, and it came in around 10 degrees, so that's fairly standard. Now, interesting enough, this is their full chisel chain, and it does have that very little point on it. And what is absent in this type of tooth is that you don't have the C shape. And that's what I'm seeing on a lot of the full chisels. They're making a little tiny point on it, and they're not using that full C shape. Okay, so the next chain that we've got is the Hurricane chain, full chisel. And if we put a slide up, we'll see that it's got the standard top plate cutting angle of 60 degrees. We're using 30 degrees. We've got 30 degrees shown because we're using 0 degrees reference point, not 90 degrees reference point. So that's a 60 degree angle if we use 90 degree reference point, so that's spot on. Okay, so we look at the side plate. Side plate is a slightly little bit different there. It's showing 20 degrees. It's really 70 degrees because that 20 degrees is from a 0 degree reference point. So if we use 90 degrees as a reference point and we move 20 degrees, we're 70 degrees. So that's a 70 degree back slope on that. The next slide is our top plate at 30 degrees, so that's fairly standard. And if we're to look at our back slope, we'll put another slide in for that, and that's 10 degree back slope. Same thing, you can notice a little file mark with the C shape on it. And again, it brings me back to that point that they're selling chains with these little profiles that are totally different than the file can't duplicate that shape. So that's interesting in itself why they do that. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I like a chainsaw grinder, because I can change the profile to virtually any type of shape that I want. We'll go on to the next one. Okay, so we've got Stihl Hexa. Only sort of brought out about 5 years ago, so something like that there, for the forestry industry. We'll put a slide up there, and you'll notice that it's got a very aggressive angle. It goes down the side plate on the flat section about 2/3 of the way. It's 60-degree top plate cutting angle if you use 90 degrees as a reference point. If you use 0 degrees as vertical reference point, it's 30 degrees, so it's spot on. Now, we'll put another slide up. The side plate. Now, I would have thought the side plate should have been from the two extremes, from the top plate cutting angle to the side plate angle there, the span is 125 degrees. It should be 120, because if you put a hexagonal file in there, it'll be 120, but clearly, maybe it's made in the factory, it's 125 degrees. So anyway, the bottom part is not the most important part, it's the top part. But it comes in at 125 degrees. Okay, the next slide is the top plate angle is at 25 degrees, not 30. It's also got a narrower kerf. It's about 4.1 millimeters wide, the kerf. That's the width of the tooth facing the top. And standard's about 4.5. So just a little bit narrower kerf and a nice pointy edge. Again, noticing that this profile totally lacks any C shape. It's non-existent. Still sell a hexagonal file, which is 60 degrees per side, or if you've got a USG grinder, you can buy a hexagonal wheel for that, or if you've got an Oregon type grinder, you can profile that quite easily as well to get that hexagonal shape. The next slide will be the back slope, and that's got standard 10-degree back slope, which is pretty much generic, and that helps the rocking motion as well. So from these ones that I've shown, clearly what's missing is the C shape. It's almost like the C shape is going out if you're using a grinder. If you're using a file, well, the C shape will always be there. You can't get rid of it. But typically with these chains that I've shown, there is no real C shape in them. It's all got little pointy tips on the side plate in the flat section. Below that flat section of the side plate, it doesn't really do any cutting in the true sense. It severs some loose fibres, and that's about all it does. It's the working corner. It's that little tiny point that's right there that does all the work, about 1 millimetre either side. Does all the hard work. The rest, no, it doesn't do much work at all. Okay, so we've had a look at 4 different chains. We've measured them all. And now, is there a winner? I mean, there's many others out there on the market. You've got Carlton, you've got Oregon. Very, very similar. The geometry changes slightly, but not that much. This would be the most aggressive top plate cutting angle, coming in at 40 degrees. So it's got a fairly large point on it at 40 degrees, then sort of sweeps down like that. Something that cannot be maintained by a file. So unfortunately, if you go out and buy the X-Cut C85, you'll only get to use it once if you put a round file through and sharpen that. To avoid that and to maintain that profile, if you want to keep it, you need to dress a grinding wheel on a chainsaw grinder. Okay, so the next one, the Stihl RS chain, it's only got a very small point, but nonetheless still got a sharp point, and its side plate's about 85 degrees also, so it's not as aggressive as a Husqvarna, but it's still a little bit aggressive. Hurricane, it's much more aggressive. You'll notice it's got 60-degree top plate cutting angle coming in. And also, if you look at the side plate, it came down about 2/3 of the way before it changed direction. And I think it was about 85 degrees or something like that on the side plate in the midsection. And then sort of came to a little bit of a sweep down the bottom of the gullet like they all do. Stihl's Hexa, Rapid Hexa, it's totally different than all the rest. It comes in at 60 degrees, then goes out at another 60 degrees, so that's got a span of 120 degrees. This has a worldwide patent on it. It comes, if you buy it in a kit like that, you get 2 chains, a handle and a file, a hexagonal file. One thing that these chains all have in common is that if you use a round file on them, you'll certainly destroy them. So you wouldn't use a round file on Hexa. You certainly won't use it on X-Cut as well. You could possibly get away using a round file on these two, the Hurricane and the Stihl RS. But if you are happy, doesn't matter which chain out of here that you like, they've all got that pointy little tip on them. And if you actually do like its performance and you want to maintain that performance, you need to dress your grinding wheel. If you've got a chainsaw grinder, you need to dress that grinding wheel. You could try it on an old chain till you get the profile right. Once you get the profile right, you should be okay and good to go. So what I am seeing on full chisel is they're slowly not using this C shape like that on the chains that they're manufacturing. So in the case of all these 3 chains here, yes, you can use a round file, but if you use a round file, you'll destroy that shape that it came out with manufacturing, which begs the differ. Why make it in the first place if you're going to destroy it? You only get to use it once. So to me, it's pointless putting these little aggressive little tips on there when you only get to use it once, unless you're using a grinder. But what it will tell you on here, you have a look at it, it'll tell you to use a 732 round file. So it defeats the purpose in the first place in selling something like that. So to me, my favourite chain out of all of these is I still like the RS as a favourite chain, but my favourite chain of all is the Stihl Hexa. One thing, irrespective of what type of shape that's on the side plate and what angle it comes in at, is the durability of that chain. There's no point having the chain and go, wow, this cut's okay, but you've got to sharpen it too frequently. I find that this outlasts a standard C-shape full chisel chain. I find it cuts a lot faster than standard full chisel chain. I find that these 3 cut a little bit faster than standard full chisel chain, which has a typical C-type shape. So, and it comes down to what type of wood you're cutting. That is also another critical factor. Typically in frozen wood and in extremely hardwood eucalypt that we have here in Australia, I still use full chisel, but I always make sure that it certainly doesn't have a lot of hook on it. If you have too much hook on it, you'll certainly damage the end. If we go back to 1991 and we look in the Stihl bar and chain catalogue that I've got, they were recommending that you hold the file 10% or 1/10 the diameter above the highest point of the tooth. In the year, somewhere in the year 2000 and something, could have been 2005, 2006, I don't know exactly the exact date, they started recommending using a file 20% above the highest point of the tooth. But people were still getting too much hook on there. So the latest in the last year or so is still saying hold the file 25%. So you probably find out that if you hold it 20% above here, you're going to have about a 60-degree top plate cutting angle right on that point. And by the time you get down about here, it's all going to change. So this is the most important part, right on this working corner. This first millimetre on the side and the first millimetre on the top plate is the critical part for this tooth to do its work. It's called the working corner, and it's called the working corner for a reason, because it does the most work. Down the bottom of the gullet will only sever some fibres. So yeah, it's got a purpose, but it's not as critical as the top of the tooth right at that working corner in the point. All these chains have that little sharp point, and it appears to me that they definitely work better. I use all of these chains, and I use standard full chisel. I believe that they work between 5 and 10% better than that type of shape. So it's not a game changer. Let's put it that way. So if you've got very soft wood, all of these chains will work perfect in softwood. If you've got extremely hardwood, you just got to make sure that you don't have too much hook on your chain. You certainly don't have much hook on RS. To me, RS would be probably more suitable in really hardwood than Hexa. Now, I'm talking about frozen wood and hardwood, because Stihl Hexa has a very large, not a hook, but the side plate has got a fairly large point on it, whereas this has a small point on it. So anything, especially the Husqvarna, that is more susceptible than the Hexa to get a damaged point, because it really doesn't have enough metal support, in my opinion, on frozen wood or extremely hard wood. Whereas certainly the Stihl RS would be more suitable, would be your general all-rounder. This may be slightly better than that, but not by much. And hey, if you're chopping firewood, it's not going to make diddly squat. I hope this information helps. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.